If you grew up in the 1990s, you lived through something no generation before you experienced. You were the last to know childhood without the internet, and the first to have your entire adult life shaped by it. You played outside until dark. You recorded songs off the radio onto cassette tapes. You passed handwritten notes in class. And then, somewhere in the middle of your youth, everything changed. Dial-up internet, cell phones, social media. You watched the world transform in real time. And you transformed with it. This is the psychology of adults who grew up in the 1990s. And why your generation carries a unique kind of weight. Let me explain. You are what researchers call a bridge generation. You have one foot in the analog world and one foot in the digital. You remember life before screens dominated everything. But you also adapted to technology faster than your parents ever could. This gives you a rare perspective. You know what was lost, and you know what was gained. And sometimes that knowledge is a burden. Here's what shaped your psychology. The 1990s felt optimistic. The Cold War was over. The economy was booming. Crime rates were dropping. Your parents believed the world was getting better. And they raised you to believe you could be anything. Follow your dreams. You're special. You can do whatever you set your mind to. These messages felt empowering at the time. But they came with a hidden cost. When you grew up and discovered that hard work doesn't always pay off, that dreams don't always come true, that being special doesn't guarantee success, the disillusionment hit hard. You weren't prepared for a world that didn't care how special you were. And that gap between expectation and reality, many of you are still trying to close it. Here's the first pattern. You struggle with the comparison trap. You grew up before social media, so you remember what it felt like to only compare yourself to people you actually knew. Your classmates, your neighbors, maybe some celebrities on TV. But then came Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Suddenly, you were comparing yourself to everyone. Their vacations, their careers, their relationships, their perfect lives. And even though you know, logically, that social media is a highlight reel, your nervous system doesn't always get the message. You feel behind. You feel like everyone else figured it out. You feel like you're the only one still struggling. That's not reality. That's an algorithm designed to make you feel inadequate. Here's the second pattern. You carry a strange kind of nostalgia. Not just for the 90s itself, but for a world that felt simpler. Before everything was connected. Before you could be reached at any moment. Before the news cycle was 24/7 and every crisis was in your pocket. You remember what boredom felt like. Real boredom, where you had to create your own entertainment. You remember what being unreachable felt like. Leaving the house and just being gone. That world is gone now. And part of you is still grieving it. Here's the third pattern. You were raised by parents who were emotionally unavailable in a different way than previous generations. Your Boomer or Gen X parents weren't as strict as their parents. They gave you more freedom. But many of them were also dealing with their own unprocessed trauma. Divorce rates peaked. Latchkey kids were common. Quality time replaced quantity time. You might have had more toys than your parents ever did. But you might have also spent a lot of time alone, figuring things out by yourself, learning that adults were busy and you shouldn't bother them. As an adult now, you might recognize this pattern. You're fiercely independent. You don't like asking for help. You learned early that you had to handle things on your own. That's not always a strength. Sometimes it's a wall. Here's the fourth pattern. You entered adulthood during economic chaos. If you graduated high school or college around 2008, you walked straight into the Great Recession. The rules your parents taught you, go to college, get a good job, buy a house, suddenly didn't work. Degrees didn't guarantee jobs. Jobs didn't guarantee stability. Stability felt like a myth. And while you were trying to figure it out, older generations called you lazy. Entitled, Avocado Toast. You weren't lazy. You were adapting to a game where the rules changed mid-play. Here's the fifth pattern. You have a complicated relationship with technology. You're not a digital native like Gen Z. You remember the before times. But you're also not a digital immigrant like boomers, struggling to adapt. You're somewhere in between. You adopted technology eagerly, maybe too eagerly. You built your social life on platforms that didn't exist when you were born. You watched those platforms change from connection tools to attention machines. And now, in your 30s or 40s, you're trying to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with something that's designed to be addictive. You know the cost of constant connectivity, but you also can't fully disconnect. Your work requires it. Your relationships depend on it. Your brain is wired for it now. That tension, you carry it every day. Here's what most people don't realize. 90s kids were sold a specific version of adulthood that never arrived. The stable job with the pension. The house with the white picket fence. The linear path from education to career to retirement. That world existed for your parents. It didn't exist for you. And instead of acknowledging that the game changed, society blamed you for not winning it. That's a psychological burden. Feeling like you failed at a game that was rigged before you started playing. Here's the generational context. Your grandparents survived wars and depression. Your parents grew up in relative stability and expansion. They expected the same for you. But you came of age during terrorism, recession, climate crisis, and pandemic. You've been in crisis mode for most of your adult life. And you've normalized it. You call it adulting. You make jokes about your anxiety. You meme your depression. Because what else can you do? Here's where you are now. You're in your 30s or 40s. Old enough to see patterns. Young enough to change them. You're the generation that's filling therapists' offices. Not because you're weak, but because you're the first generation to take mental health seriously. You're doing the work your parents never did. You're examining your childhood. You're questioning the messages you absorbed. You're trying to break cycles. That's not self-indulgent. That's courageous. Here's what I want you to know. The disillusionment you feel is valid. The world you were promised didn't show up. But that doesn't mean you failed. It means you're adapting to a reality no one prepared you for. The skills you have, bridging old and new, remembering what was, adapting to what is, those are valuable. You know what connection felt like before it was commodified. You know what childhood felt like before it was optimized. You carry a memory of a slower world. And maybe that memory is exactly what's needed now. Not as nostalgia, but as a compass. You know what was lost, which means you might be the ones who can help find it again. Before you go, tell me, did you grow up in the 90s? Do you feel caught between two worlds? Drop it in the comments. And if you finally understand why your generation feels the way it does, comment. Bridge generation. Let's see how many of us are carrying this weight together. You're not alone. And you're not behind. You're exactly where someone with your experiences would be. And that's enough.